"Ma'am, I need you to step away from that house, now." The voice cut through the cold morning like metal scraping glass, sharp and controlled, the kind of tone that made neighbors peek through blinds without meaning to. Marcus Reed stood barefoot on the small patch of cracked concrete outside his front door, a plastic container still warm in his hands, steam barely rising in the chill. He hadn't even noticed the first vehicle pull up, or the second, or the way the street filled, one quiet engine at a time, until the air itself felt different, heavier, tighter, like something important was about to happen and nobody had told him why. His mother's screen door creaked behind him, soft but urgent, her hand hovering near his shoulder without touching it, like she wasn't sure if this moment would shatter if she did. Across the narrow street, phones were already out, held chest high, angled carefully so it didn't look obvious. 50 men in uniform didn't just appear in a neighborhood like this. Not before breakfast. Not without a reason. Marcus swallowed, the taste of last night's instant noodles still faint on his tongue, and shifted his weight, the concrete cold against his heel. He looked down at the container in his hand. Rice, a little chicken, greens he'd picked up cheap near closing time, and for a second, it felt absurdly small compared to everything else now surrounding him. One of the Marines stepped forward, boots precise against asphalt, stopping just short of the walkway. No rush. No raised voice. Just presence. That was enough. "You Marcus Reed?" the man asked, not unkindly, but not casually either. Marcus nodded before he realized he had, his throat tight. He hadn't done anything wrong. At least, nothing he could think of. He worked after school. He kept his head down. He stayed out of trouble, even when trouble didn't always stay out of his way. His eyes flicked briefly to the neighbors. Mrs. Dalton clutching her robe closed. Mr. Hargrove pretending to check his mailbox for the third time, and then back to the line of uniforms stretching farther than he could count without turning his head. The morning light caught on polished badges and crisp fabric, reflecting in flashes that made him squint. It didn't feel like anger. It didn't feel like chaos. That somehow made it worse. His mom finally spoke, voice low but steady. "What is this about?" No one answered her right away. The pause stretched, thin as wire, until another figure stepped out from the second vehicle, older, slower, authority in the way he didn't need to hurry. Marcus felt it before he understood it. Something shifting, like the center of gravity in the moment, had just moved. He tightened his grip on the container without realizing, the plastic lid bending slightly under his fingers. He thought about last night. The walk. The cold biting through his hoodie. The way she'd smiled, small and tired, like she didn't expect anyone to come back. He hadn't told anyone about her. Not because it was a secret, just because it didn't feel like something you explained. You either did it, or you didn't. The older man's eyes found him, steady, searching, not hostile, but not soft either. Marcus straightened a little without meaning to, instinct kicking in, the same quiet defense he used at school when teachers assumed too much and classmates said too little. The street had gone completely still now, even the distant hum of traffic fading behind the weight of what stood in front of him. Somewhere, a car door shut softly. Somewhere, a phone camera zoomed in. Marcus took a slow breath, the kind you take when you're about to speak and don't know what words will come out yet. "Did I do something wrong, sir?" he asked, voice calm but thinner than he wanted it to be. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze dropped, just for a second, to the container in Marcus's hands. And that's when something in his expression changed, so slight most people wouldn't catch it, but Marcus did. A flicker, recognition, or maybe something heavier than that. The kind of look people get when a piece finally clicks into place. Behind him, one of the Marines shifted his stance, almost imperceptible, like a silent signal had just passed through the line. Marcus felt his heartbeat pick up, not loud, but steady, like footsteps approaching from somewhere he couldn't see yet. He had no idea why they were here, but he was starting to feel like they knew exactly who he was. The man did not reach for a weapon or raise his voice, and somehow that made the silence heavier, like the entire street was holding its breath at once. Colonel James Whitaker stopped just short of the walkway, his posture straight but not rigid, eyes still fixed on Marcus as if measuring something invisible. Up close, the details sharpened, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through his hair, the way his uniform sat perfectly without looking forced. This was someone used to being listened to without asking. Marcus felt his pulse in his fingertips now, pressing into the warm plastic container, grounding himself in something simple, something real. Food. That was all it had ever been. Just food. You brought that for her again. The colonel said quietly, not a question, more like confirming something he already knew. Marcus blinked once, thrown off by the direction of it, then nodded slowly. Yes, sir. His voice came out steadier this time, though his chest still felt tight. Behind the colonel, the line of Marines stood unmoving, boots aligned, eyes forward, but Marcus could feel their attention shift, subtle but unmistakable, like the entire formation had leaned in without moving a muscle. His mother stepped closer beside him now, her hand finally resting lightly against his arm, a silent anchor. Who is this about? She asked again, softer this time, as if the answer might break something fragile. The colonel did not look at her right away. His gaze remained on Marcus, and for a moment, there was something else in it. Not authority, not suspicion. Something quieter. Something that did not belong in a scene like this. How long have you been bringing her food? He asked. Marcus hesitated, doing the math without meaning to. Nights blurred together when you worked late and walked home even later. A couple weeks, he said. Maybe 3. The colonel's jaw shifted slightly, like he was holding back a reaction that did not quite belong on his face. Every day. Marcus shrugged a little, eyes dropping for a second before lifting again. Most days. If I can. He did not explain the hours. The paycheck stretched thin, the way he skipped his own dinner sometimes because it felt easier that way. None of that felt like something you said out loud. The colonel nodded once, slow, absorbing it, and then finally glanced down at the container in Marcus's hands. The steam had faded now, the lid fogging just slightly on the inside. What is in there today? Marcus almost smiled, just barely, the kind of expression that showed up before you could stop it. Chicken and rice. Some greens. He paused, then added, she likes the greens more. That was the first time something shifted in the colonel's expression in a way that was not controlled. It was quick, almost gone before it fully formed, but Marcus saw it, recognition again, but deeper this time, edged with something that looked like memory. One of the Marines behind him adjusted his stance, a quiet scuff against pavement, and Marcus caught a glimpse of their faces now, not just uniform anymore. Younger than he expected. Older too. Different backgrounds, same stillness. All of them here, for something that still made no sense. Where is she now? The colonel asked. Marcus frowned slightly, confusion flickering in. She stays by the bus stop, 2 blocks down, he said, pointing vaguely over his shoulder. Near the old pharmacy. The colonel followed the direction of his gesture without turning his head fully, then looked back at Marcus, something tightening behind his eyes. Was she there last night? Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. I dropped this off late. He lifted the container a fraction, as if proving it. She was tired, but she was okay. The word okay hung in the air for a second, thinner than it should have been. The colonel exhaled slowly through his nose, not quite a sigh, more like a calculation ending. His hand moved slightly at his side, a small signal, and behind him, one of the Marines stepped forward half a pace, waiting. Marcus felt the shift ripple outward, the tension in the street changing shape instead of disappearing. This was not over. Not even close. His mother's fingers tightened on his arm just a little, and he realized she was breathing faster now, though she was trying to hide it. Sir, Marcus said again, quieter this time. If there is a problem, I can explain. The colonel looked at him, then in a way that made the word problem feel out of place, like it did not belong to this moment at all. Son, he said, voice lower now, almost careful. That is exactly what we are trying to understand. He paused, eyes drifting once more to the container, then back to Marcus, and whatever he saw there seemed to settle something inside him. Not resolve. Not yet. But direction. Behind him, engines ticked softly as they cooled. The morning light climbing higher, catching on metal and glass and the edges of a moment that felt like it was about to turn into something else entirely. Marcus shifted his weight again, the cold concrete no longer the thing he noticed most. It was the waiting, the not knowing, the sense that whatever came next had already been decided somewhere he could not see. The colonel straightened just slightly, drawing in a breath like someone preparing to speak something that mattered. And then he asked a question Marcus was not ready for. The question hung there for half a second longer than it should have, like it needed time to settle before it made sense. Did she ever tell you her name? Colonel Whitaker asked, his voice steady but carrying something quieter underneath, something that did not match the sharp precision of everything else around him. Marcus blinked, caught off guard by how simple it sounded compared to everything building in the street. Out of all the things he expected, that was not it. He shifted the container slightly in his hands, the lid giving a faint creak under his grip, and nodded. Evelyn, he said. Evelyn Carter. The name landed softly, but the effect was immediate. It was not loud, not dramatic, but it moved through the line of Marines like a ripple under still water. A few shoulders tightened. One head turned just slightly before snapping back forward. Marcus felt it more than he saw it. The way you feel a room change when someone says something important without realizing it. The colonel closed his eyes for just a fraction of a second, then opened them again, and whatever had been held behind them was no longer as contained. Not broken, not exposed, just heavier. And she told you that herself? He asked. Marcus nodded again, slower this time. Yes, sir. The second day I met her. He paused, thinking back, the memory clearer now that it had been pulled forward. The way she had hesitated before saying it, like names were something you had to earn again once you lost everything else. She said it like she was not sure it still belonged to her. The colonel's jaw tightened, and this time he did not hide it. His gaze dropped briefly to the ground, then lifted again, locking onto Marcus with something that was no longer just assessment. It was recognition, not of Marcus, of what Marcus had been part of without knowing. Did she ever mention family? The question came softer now, almost careful, like stepping onto something fragile. Marcus shook his head. No, sir. She mostly just talks about small things. Weather, food, sometimes music. He hesitated, then added, she hums sometimes. Old songs, I think. A faint sound escaped someone in the line behind the colonel. Not quite a breath, not quite a word, but enough to break the perfect stillness for a moment before it settled again. The colonel's expression shifted again, and this time it stayed. There was no mistaking it now. This was not about suspicion. This was not about control. This was something else entirely, something Marcus was only beginning to understand the edges of. His mother glanced up at him, confusion written plainly across her face, but she stayed quiet, sensing that whatever this was, it had already moved beyond simple explanations. What time do you usually go? The colonel asked. Marcus frowned slightly, trying to piece together why it mattered. After my shift. Around 10, sometimes later. He looked down at the container again, then back up. She is usually still awake. The colonel nodded slowly, like each detail was fitting into a space that had been empty for too long. And last night. Marcus swallowed, the memory sharper now. It was colder, he said. She had her blanket pulled up more than usual. I stayed a few minutes longer. He did not say that he had almost left early, that he had been tired, that he had thought about just going home. That moment felt different now, like a decision he did not realize had mattered. Did she say anything unusual? Marcus thought about it, the street around him fading slightly as he searched the memory. The flicker of the streetlight, the way her hands had trembled just a little more than before. The pause before she spoke. She said, he started, then stopped, replaying it carefully. She said I reminded her of someone. The colonel's eyes sharpened instantly. Did she say who? Marcus shook his head. No, sir. Just that he wore a uniform. The words landed heavier than anything else had so far. This time, the reaction was not subtle. It was controlled, but it was there. A shift in posture. A breath held. Too long. A glance exchanged too quickly. Marcus felt it hit the center of whatever this was, even if he still could not see the full shape of it. The colonel looked at him for a long moment, longer than before, like he was seeing something that had not been visible until now. Then his gaze moved, just briefly, to the container again. Chicken, rice, greens. Simple. Consistent. Enough. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not louder. Not softer. Just different. Marcus, he said, using his name for the first time. We have been looking for her for 3 years. The words settled into the space between them, quiet but impossible to ignore. 3 years. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, not fear this time, but something closer to realization, like a door opening just enough to let light in. He glanced past the colonel, at the line of Marines stretching down the street, and for the first time, he saw them differently. Not as a show of force, not as a threat, but as something else entirely. Something that had been waiting. We checked shelters, hospitals, Every city we could think of, the colonel continued, each word measured, controlled, but carrying the weight of something much larger than the street they stood on. And all this time, he did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. Marcus looked down at the container in his hands again, the warmth almost gone now, and felt the meaning of it change completely. It was not just food anymore. It was proof. Proof of something none of them had expected to find this way. The colonel took a slow step forward, not closing the distance completely, but enough to shift the balance of the moment once more. "Can you take us to her?" he asked. Marcus nodded before the question had fully settled, the answer already there, already decided. "Yes, sir." He turned slightly, instinctively ready to move, but something in the air stopped him, something unfinished, something still waiting to be said. And then he noticed the way the colonel was looking at him now. The look was not what Marcus expected from a man like that. It was not authority, not command, not even relief. It was something quieter, something almost unfamiliar on a face that seemed built for certainty. Respect. It landed slowly, like it had weight to it. Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shifted his stance and stepped off the concrete, the cold no longer sharp against his feet, just distant, irrelevant. His mother's hand slipped from his arm as he moved, but her eyes stayed locked on him, searching, trying to understand how a morning that started like any other had turned into this. "I will walk," Marcus said, glancing briefly at the line of vehicles. "It is not far." The colonel nodded once, immediate, no hesitation. "We walk with you." It was not a suggestion, but it was not a command either. Something in between. Something shared. Marcus turned toward the end of the street, the familiar cracks in the pavement guiding him without thought. He had walked this route so many times he could do it in the dark, in the cold, half asleep. Now every step felt different, measured, watched. Behind him, boots moved in quiet unison, not marching, not formal, just present. The sound of it changed the rhythm of the neighborhood. Doors stayed half open. Curtains shifted. Phones followed. The morning light climbed higher, catching on windshields, on badges, on the edges of something that did not belong here, but had arrived anyway. Marcus kept his eyes forward, but he could feel it all, pressing in from every side. After half a block, he spoke again, not turning around. "She does not like crowds," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something protective in it now, something that had not been there before. Sometimes loud sounds make her nervous. The colonel's response came quickly, but softer than before. "Understood." He lifted his hand slightly, and behind them, the formation adjusted. Not breaking, just spreading, giving space. Marcus noticed. He did not say anything, but something in his shoulders eased just a little. They turned the corner onto a narrower street, the pavement rougher, the buildings older, paint peeling in places where time had been left to do its work. This part of town did not get much attention. It did not ask for it either. A stray piece of paper skittered across the sidewalk, caught briefly against Marcus's shoe before moving on. He stepped over it without thinking, the container still steady in his hands. "Does she ever ask for anything?" the colonel asked from just behind him. Marcus shook his head. "No, sir. She usually says she has enough." He paused, then added, "Even when she does not." The colonel did not respond right away. Marcus could feel the question forming behind him, the kind that carried more than curiosity, but it did not come. Instead, the sound of footsteps filled the space again, steady, controlled, patient. They passed the old convenience store on the corner, its windows dusty, a faded sign flickering weakly above the door. Marcus glanced at it for a second, remembering the night he first saw her sitting near the bus stop just beyond it. He had almost walked past. Almost. The memory stayed with him longer than it should have as they moved closer now, each step pulling the past and present tighter together. "She sits right up there," Marcus said quietly, pointing ahead. The bus stop came into view slowly, the metal bench worn, the glass panel behind it marked with scratches and old tape residue. The morning light hit it at an angle, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. For a moment, everything felt suspended, like the air itself was waiting. Marcus slowed his pace without meaning to, his eyes searching the spot before they fully reached it. Something felt off. Not wrong. Just different. The blanket was still there, folded more neatly than usual. A small paper cup sat on the ground beside the bench, untouched. But she was not. Marcus stopped completely now, the motion behind him halting in quiet sequence, boots finding stillness again. His grip on the container tightened slightly, the plastic bending under the pressure. "She was here last night," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The colonel stepped up beside him now, his gaze scanning the scene with a precision that felt different from before. Not searching anymore. Confirming. He crouched slightly, eyes catching on something near the edge of the bench. Marcus followed his line of sight and saw it too. A thin chain, barely visible against the concrete, catching just enough light to stand out if you were looking for it. The colonel reached for it carefully, lifting it into his palm. The small pendant at the end turned once in the light, and whatever was written on his face before was gone now, replaced by something deeper, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood. Marcus felt a quiet shift settle into his chest, something heavier than confusion, heavier than fear. This was real now. All of it. The colonel stood slowly, the chain still resting in his hand, and looked at Marcus again, but this time there was no distance left in the gaze. Only truth. And then, from somewhere down the street, a voice called out, "Hey, she is not gone. I saw her this morning." The voice came from down the block, breathless, uneven, like it had chased the moment just to reach them. Every head turned at once, the stillness breaking just enough to let the sound in. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he stepped forward instinctively, eyes scanning for the source. A man in his late 40s hurried toward them from the direction of the old pharmacy, a paper bag clutched loosely in one hand, his jacket half zipped like he had thrown it on without thinking. He slowed as he got closer, his pace faltering slightly when he saw the line of Marines, the uniforms, the weight of everything gathered around a single empty bus stop. "You talking about the lady who sits here?" he asked, looking between Marcus and the colonel, unsure who to address. Marcus nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Evelyn." The man exhaled, nodding back, relief flickering across his face like he had been holding onto the information for someone who finally needed it. "She left early today. Real early. Before sunrise." The colonel stepped forward, his posture tightening again, focus narrowing. "Did she say where she was going?" The man shook his head. "No, but she looked different." He hesitated, searching for the right words, his eyes drifting briefly to Marcus before returning to the colonel. "Cleaner. Like she fixed herself up some. And she was holding something." Marcus leaned in slightly, the container still in his hands, forgotten but not dropped. "Holding what?" The man lifted his free hand, gesturing vaguely. "A small bag, I think. And a piece of paper." That detail settled into the air with a quiet weight. The colonel's gaze sharpened instantly, his mind already moving ahead of the moment. "Did you see which direction she went?" The man pointed down the street, toward the intersection where the road widened and traffic picked up. "That way, toward Maine." Marcus followed the direction with his eyes, his thoughts racing now, replaying the night before, every small detail. Suddenly feeling like it mattered more than it should have. She had been tired, quieter than usual, but there had been something else too. Something he had not understood at the time. The way she held his gaze a second longer before he left. The way her hand rested briefly on the container before pulling away. She said something. Marcus murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The colonel turned to him immediately. "What did she say?" Marcus swallowed, the memory coming back clearer now that it had a place to land. "She said, tomorrow might be different." The words hung there, simple but heavy, like they had been waiting for this moment to mean something. The colonel looked back down at the chain in his hand, the small pendant catching the morning light again, and for the first time since arriving, something close to urgency moved through him. Not panic, not loss of control, just a shift from waiting to action. He turned slightly, his voice low but firm. "We move." The Marines behind him responded without hesitation, their formation adjusting smoothly, no wasted motion, no raised voices. Just direction. Marcus stood there for half a second longer, the world around him starting to move again while he was still catching up to it. Then he stepped forward, almost without thinking. "I know where she might go," he said. The colonel paused, just enough to turn back toward him. "Where?" Marcus glanced toward Main Street again, then back at the bus stop, at the bench, at the space she had occupied for weeks like it was the only place left that knew her name. "There is a church about 4 blocks down," he said. "Sometimes she looks at it when we walk past. She never goes in. Just looks." The colonel studied him for a moment. weighing something that did not need to be spoken. Then he nodded once. "Show us." Marcus shifted the container in his hands, the warmth almost completely gone now, but he held on to it anyway, like it still mattered. Maybe it did. He turned and started walking again, faster this time, the rhythm different now, no longer careful, no longer uncertain. Behind him, the sound of boots followed, steady and controlled, but carrying a new energy beneath it. The man with the paper bag stepped back toward the sidewalk, watching them pass, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and understanding, like he had just witnessed something he would not be able to explain later. The street opened up as they approached Main, the noise of distant traffic growing louder, the morning fully awake now. Marcus kept his eyes forward, his mind fixed on one thing only: finding her, before whatever this moment was slipped past them. And as they reached the corner, he saw something ahead that made him slow down. At the corner, just before the street opened into the wider stretch of Main, Marcus saw the flicker of something pale against the movement of cars and people, a shape that did not belong to the rush of morning traffic. It was not clear at first, just a hint of fabric shifting near the far sidewalk, but something in the way it moved made him slow down without thinking. His steps shortened, his breathing catching slightly as his eyes focused harder, trying to separate her from everything else. The noise of engines, distant horns, and voices blurred into the background as that single point in front of him sharpened. "There," he said quietly, almost under his breath, but it carried enough for the colonel to hear. The man's attention followed instantly, precise and alert, and then he saw it too. A figure standing just outside the small brick church, near the edge of the steps, still but not rigid, like someone deciding whether to go in or turn away. Evelyn. She looked different, just like the man had said. Not transformed, not suddenly whole, but composed. Her hair was brushed back, uneven but intentional. The coat she wore was the same, but buttoned this time, pulled closer around her frame. And in her hands, held carefully like it mattered, was a small paper bag and a folded piece of paper. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, not confusion, just a quiet recognition that this moment had been coming before he even knew it existed. He stepped forward again, faster now, but not rushing, like he did not want to startle something fragile. Behind him, the Marines slowed their pace without being told, the formation widening again, giving space, letting the moment belong to something smaller, something more human. The colonel walked just behind Marcus now, his presence still strong but no longer dominating the space, as if he understood that whatever happened next did not belong to him alone. Evelyn had not noticed them yet. She stood facing the church doors, her body angled slightly, as if she had already turned away once and come back again. Her fingers tightened faintly around the paper in her hand, the edges creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. Marcus could see the slight tremor in her shoulders, the kind that came from more than just the morning cold. He slowed as he reached the sidewalk across from her, stopping just long enough to take a breath before crossing the street. "Evelyn," he called softly, his voice careful, steady, the same way he always spoke to her. Not loud, not urgent, just present. She turned at the sound of it, slowly at first, like she was not sure if it was real, and then fully when her eyes found him. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The street, the uniforms, the weight of what stood behind him. It was just her and the boy who brought her food. A faint smile touched her lips, tired but real, the kind that came from recognition rather than surprise. "You came early today," she said, her voice soft, carrying just enough to reach him. Marcus stepped closer, the container still in his hands, suddenly aware of it again. "I was looking for you," he said. He did not mention the Marines. He did not mention the street behind him. Not yet. Evelyn's eyes shifted slightly past him then, catching on something over his shoulder, and the smile faded just enough to make room for something else. Not fear. Not quite. Something deeper. Something that had been waiting longer than he understood. The colonel stopped a few steps behind Marcus, not moving forward, not speaking, just watching. The distance between them felt deliberate now, like a line that should not be crossed too quickly. Evelyn's gaze found him next, and in that instant, everything in her posture changed. It was subtle, but undeniable. Her shoulders straightened. Her grip on the paper steadied. The hesitation that had lingered around her seemed to settle into something firmer. Recognition passed between them without a word, quiet but complete. Marcus felt it without understanding it, like standing between two people who shared a history too large to explain. The morning light caught the edge of the paper in her hand, and as it shifted, he noticed something written across it in careful, deliberate strokes. He could not read it from where he stood, but he knew it mattered. He knew it was part of whatever this moment was becoming. Evelyn took a small step forward, her eyes still on the colonel now, her voice softer than before, but steady. "You found me," she said. The colonel did not answer right away. He held her gaze, something unspoken moving between them, something that had been building for years and had finally arrived here, on a quiet sidewalk in front of a church that had nothing to do with any of it. Marcus stood there, the container cooling in his hands, feeling like he had stepped into the center of something he had never been meant to see, and yet somehow had brought into existence anyway. The street behind him remained still, the Marines silent, the world holding itself just enough to let this happen. And then Evelyn unfolded the paper in her hands. The paper made a soft sound as it unfolded, the kind of dry, delicate rustle that felt louder than it should have in the stillness around them. Marcus did not move, but his attention locked onto it, the way the edges trembled slightly in Evelyn's hands, not from the cold this time, but from something deeper, something held back too long. The colonel took one slow step forward, stopping just short of closing the space between them, as if he understood that whatever was written there needed to be seen before anything else could be said. Evelyn glanced down at the page, her eyes scanning the words she already knew, her lips pressing together briefly before she lifted it slightly, not fully offering it, not hiding it either. "I was not sure if you would ever read this," she said quietly, her voice steady but carrying a softness that had not been there before. Marcus felt the shift again, subtle but real, like the moment had tilted just enough to reveal something underneath. The colonel did not reach for the paper. Instead, he looked at her, waiting, giving her the space to choose. That alone seemed to matter. Evelyn nodded faintly, as if answering something unspoken, and then she began to speak, her voice low but clear enough to carry across the small distance between them. "I am sorry I disappeared," she read, the words simple, unadorned, but heavy with meaning. "I did not know how to come back after everything changed." Marcus felt a quiet pull in his chest, the kind that came from hearing something too personal to belong to him, but impossible to ignore. The colonel's face did not move, but something behind his eyes shifted again, deeper this time, like the words had found exactly where they were meant to land. Evelyn continued, her grip on the paper steadying as she spoke. "I thought if I stayed away long enough, it would be easier for you. For all of you." She paused, just for a second, her eyes lifting briefly from the page to meet his, and in that glance, there was something fragile and strong at the same time. But I was wrong. The street remained silent, the distant hum of traffic now just a faint backdrop to something far more present. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, the container in his hands forgotten again, but not dropped, his fingers still curled around it like it connected him to the moment in a way nothing else could. Evelyn lowered the paper just a fraction, her voice no longer reading now, but speaking. "I watched from a distance, sometimes," she said, "just to make sure you were still you." The colonel exhaled slowly, not quite a sigh, more like a breath he had been holding longer than he realized. His posture remained straight, controlled, but the distance between that and something more human had narrowed completely now. "You did not need to stay away," he said, his voice quieter than before, not carrying command anymore, just truth. Evelyn gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "I did," she said. "Not for you. For me." The words settled into the space between them, firm and final in a way that did not ask for agreement. Marcus watched, feeling like he was standing at the edge of something he could not fully understand, but somehow had become part of anyway. The Marines behind them remained still, but the stillness felt different now, less rigid, more aware, like even they could feel the weight of what was unfolding. Evelyn looked down at the paper again, then folded it slowly, carefully, as if the act itself mattered. When she looked back up, her eyes moved past the colonel for just a moment, finding Marcus again. "He kept coming," she said softly, a faint smile touching her lips. "Even when I told him not to worry about me." Marcus felt his throat tighten slightly, not from embarrassment, not from pride, just from being seen in a way he had not expected. "You looked like you needed someone," he said quietly, the words simple, the way they always had been between them. Evelyn's smile deepened just enough to show that she understood. "We all do," she replied. The colonel followed her gaze to Marcus then, really looking at him now, not as a question, not as a possibility, but as something already proven. The recognition from before had settled into something steadier, something that did not need to change anymore. He stepped forward one more time, closing the distance just enough to stand beside Marcus instead of behind him. It was a small shift, but it changed everything. Marcus felt it without needing to look. Evelyn noticed too, her eyes softening slightly as she took in the new shape of the moment. The morning light climbed higher, catching the edges of the church doors behind her, the glass reflecting faint images of all of them standing there, connected in a way none of them had planned. Evelyn lifted the small paper bag in her other hand slightly, as if remembering it for the first time since they arrived. "I was going to leave this," she said, glancing toward the church, "and then go somewhere else." Marcus frowned faintly, confusion returning just enough to break through everything else. "Why?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him, then at the colonel, and then back at the church doors, her expression thoughtful, quiet. "Because I thought that was the only way to let things settle," she said. The colonel's voice came gently now, steady but certain. "You do not have to disappear to make things right." Evelyn held his gaze for a long moment, the truth of that statement hanging between them, not forced, not pushed, just offered. Marcus shifted slightly, the container in his hands suddenly feeling important again, like it had something to do with what came next. The air felt different now, not tense, not uncertain, but on the edge of something that had not happened yet. And then Evelyn looked down at the container he was holding. Her eyes settled on the container like it was something fragile, something more than just food now, and Marcus felt his grip shift slightly without meaning to, like he suddenly understood it carried more weight than it should. Evelyn stepped closer, just one small step, enough to close the quiet distance between them, and reached out with both hands. Not rushing, not hesitant, just careful. "You brought this again," she said softly, her voice carrying that same steady warmth he had come to recognize over the past weeks, but now there was something else layered beneath it, something like acknowledgement. Marcus nodded, his throat tightening slightly as he handed it to her, the plastic brushing lightly against her fingers as the transfer happened, simple and ordinary, but somehow heavier than anything else that had happened that morning. "I was not sure where you would be," he said. Evelyn looked down at the container in her hands, the lid slightly fogged from what little warmth remained inside, and a faint smile touched her lips again, quieter this time, more reflective. "You still came," she replied. Marcus shrugged a little, his shoulders lifting and falling in a motion that tried to make it seem smaller than it was. "I said I would." The words hung between them, uncomplicated, but complete in a way that did not need anything added. Behind them, the Marines remained still, but the stillness had softened even more, like the edges of the moment had been rounded by something none of them expected to witness. Colonel Whitaker watched the exchange without interrupting, his gaze moving from the container to Marcus, then back to Evelyn, taking in the simplicity of it, the consistency, the quiet commitment that had existed long before he arrived. Evelyn opened the container slowly, the lid giving a soft pop as it released, and a faint trace of warmth drifted into the air, carrying the scent of chicken and rice, something familiar, something grounding. She looked at it for a moment, her eyes lingering on the greens, and let out the smallest breath, almost like a laugh, though it did not quite reach that. "You remembered," she said. Marcus nodded again, a little more certain this time. "You always eat those first." Evelyn glanced up at him, her expression softening in a way that spoke more than her words did. "You notice things," she said. Marcus did not respond to that. He just stood there, hands now empty, unsure what to do with them, so he let them rest at his sides, fingers curling slightly against the cool air. The colonel stepped forward just enough to stand beside them fully now, not behind, not separate, but present in the same space. His eyes moved to the open container, then to Evelyn's face, and for a moment, he did not look like a man surrounded by authority or structure or command. He looked like someone seeing something he had not realized was missing. Evelyn lifted a small portion of the food with her fingers, slow and deliberate, and took a bite, chewing carefully, like she was tasting more than just what was in front of her. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, steady, holding something that did not need to be rushed. Marcus watched her, the tension in his chest easing just slightly, replaced by something quieter, something closer to relief, though he could not fully explain why. Evelyn swallowed, then looked at the colonel again, her gaze steady, clear. "He never asked for anything," she said. "Not once." The colonel's eyes shifted to Marcus, and this time, the look was not measured or questioning. It was certain. "Why?" he asked, his voice low, not demanding, just wanting to understand. Marcus hesitated, the question landing somewhere deeper than he expected, and for a second, he searched for an answer that felt right, not complicated, not rehearsed. "Because she needed it," he said finally. It was simple. It was enough. Evelyn nodded faintly, like she had expected nothing else. The colonel held Marcus's gaze for a moment longer, something settling fully now, something that no longer needed proof. He looked back at Evelyn, then at the container again, then out toward the street, where the Marines stood quietly, witnessing something that had shifted the entire reason they were there. The morning had moved forward, the light brighter now, casting clearer shadows along the sidewalk and the church steps, but the moment itself felt untouched by time. Evelyn closed the container gently, not because she was finished, but because she understood something about it that went beyond hunger. She held it close to her for a second, then lowered it again, her eyes returning to Marcus. "I was going to leave," she said softly. "Before you came." Marcus frowned slightly, the thought landing heavier than he expected. "Why now?" he asked. Evelyn glanced at the colonel, then back at him, her expression thoughtful, almost careful. "Because I thought staying would make things harder for everyone." The colonel's voice came steady, quiet, but firm in a way that did not need force. "You were wrong." Evelyn held his gaze, the words settling into her without resistance this time, like something she had already begun to understand before he said it. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, the air around him feeling different again, like the moment was about to change direction once more. The church doors behind Evelyn reflected the three of them standing there, a quiet image held in glass, fragile but real. And then Evelyn did something Marcus did not expect. She reached out and touched his hand. It was not sudden, not dramatic, just a light, deliberate contact, her fingers resting against his for a brief second, as if she needed to confirm something real was still there. Marcus froze, not pulling away, not reacting quickly, just feeling the warmth of her hand against his skin, unexpected and grounding at the same time. Evelyn's eyes stayed on his, and there was something in them now that had not been there before, something clearer, something settled. "Thank you," she said quietly. The words were simple, but they carried weight, not just for the food, not just for the days he showed up, but for something larger, something neither of them had ever named out loud. Marcus swallowed, his chest tightening slightly, unsure what to do with that kind of gratitude. He nodded once, small, almost instinctive. "You do not have to thank me," he said, his voice steady but softer than before. Evelyn gave a faint smile, the kind that came from knowing something the other person had not realized yet. "I do," she replied. Behind them, Colonel Whitaker watched the moment unfold, and for the first time since arriving, he did not look like he was leading anything. He looked like he was witnessing it. His gaze moved between them, taking in the quiet exchange, the absence of expectation, the way something meaningful had been built without structure or permission. It was not strategy. It was not duty. It was something else entirely. Evelyn withdrew her hand slowly, but the connection lingered in the air, subtle but present. She turned slightly then, her eyes drifting toward the church doors behind her, then back to the colonel. "I was ready to walk away again," she said. "I thought that was the only way to make things right." The colonel shook his head gently, not dismissing her, but disagreeing in a way that held respect. "You do not fix distance with more distance," he said. Evelyn considered that, her gaze thoughtful, the words settling into her without resistance this time. Marcus stood quietly between them, feeling like something was shifting that he did not fully understand, but he could feel it clearly enough to know it mattered. The Marines behind them remained still, but their presence no longer felt heavy. It felt supportive, like they were not there to take control, but to hold space for something that needed to happen. Evelyn looked down at the container again, then back at Marcus, her expression soft but certain. You kept showing up, she said, even when it would have been easier not to. Marcus shrugged slightly, the motion almost automatic. It was not that hard, he said. Evelyn tilted her head just a little, her eyes narrowing with a quiet kind of understanding. It was not easy either, she replied. Marcus did not argue with that. He could not. The cold nights, the long shifts, the walk through streets that did not always feel welcoming, the looks he sometimes got, the quiet assumptions people made when they saw him stopping near a bus bench instead of heading straight home. None of it had stopped him, but none of it had been nothing either. The colonel stepped forward another half step, his voice steady, but softer now, carrying something that did not belong to rank or authority. You gave her something we could not, he said, looking directly at Marcus. Consistency. The words settled into Marcus's chest in a way he did not expect, heavier than it sounded, like it meant more than just showing up. Evelyn nodded faintly, her eyes still on Marcus. He did not see me as something to fix, she added. He just saw me. The simplicity of it made the moment quieter, deeper, like the truth did not need anything else around it. Marcus looked down briefly, then back up, unsure how to respond to something that felt too big for words. The church doors behind Evelyn reflected the three of them again, but now the image felt different, more complete, like something had been added that had not been there before. Evelyn shifted the small paper bag in her hand, then glanced at the colonel once more. I do not know what happens next, she said. It was not fear. It was honesty. The colonel nodded slowly, accepting that without trying to reshape it. We figure it out, he said. Together. The word hung there, simple, but unfamiliar in a way that made it feel important. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod, not fully resolved, but no longer resisting. Marcus felt the air around them settle, not into stillness, but into something steady, like the moment had found its footing. The Marines behind them shifted slightly, not breaking formation, but adjusting, as if preparing for something new rather than holding on to what had already passed. Evelyn took a breath, deeper than before, and turned her body slightly toward the church, then back again, as if testing the idea of staying versus leaving. Marcus watched her, the container no longer in his hands, but somehow still part of the moment, like it had carried them all to this point. The street noise drifted back in slowly, the world continuing around them, but none of it touched what stood here. Not yet. And then Evelyn said something that made Marcus look up immediately. If I stay, it cannot be the same as before. Her voice was steady, but it carried something new, something that did not ask for permission anymore. Marcus looked up immediately, the words landing deeper than anything she had said so far. They were not uncertain. They were not hesitant. They were a line, quiet but clear. Evelyn held his gaze for a moment, then shifted it to the colonel, her posture straightening just slightly, like she had decided something before speaking it out loud. I will not disappear again, she continued. But I will not come back the way you expect either. The colonel did not react right away. He stood there, taking in every word, every shift in her tone, the way she chose them carefully, like each one mattered. Around them, the street continued to move, cars passing, people walking, but none of it touched the space they were standing in. Marcus felt something change again, not tension this time, but direction, like the moment had turned and was now moving towards something neither of them had planned. What do you need? The colonel asked finally, his voice calm, not commanding, not guiding, just open. It was a different question than before. Not where have you been? Not why did you leave? Just what do you need? Evelyn let out a slow breath, her eyes drifting briefly to the church doors, then back to him. Time, she said. And choice. The words settled between them, simple but firm. The colonel nodded once, immediately, like he understood more than he needed to say. You have both, he replied. There was no hesitation in it. No condition. Just agreement. Marcus watched the exchange, feeling like he was witnessing something shift in a way that had nothing to do with rank or power anymore. Evelyn turned back to him then, her expression softening slightly, the firmness still there, but now balanced with something warmer. You showed up when I had nothing, she said. That matters more than anything they could have brought me. Marcus shook his head faintly, not rejecting it, but not fully accepting it either. They were looking for you, he said quietly, glancing briefly toward the line of Marines. That matters too. Evelyn followed his gaze, her eyes resting on the formation for a moment. taking it in not as something overwhelming, but as something distant, something that had once been her world and now stood just outside of it. "It does," she said, "but it is not the same." The colonel stepped forward slightly, not closing the distance completely, but enough to stand clearly within the same space again. "It does not have to be the same," he said. "It just has to be real." Evelyn held his gaze, the words settling into her, not resisted, not fully accepted yet, but considered in a way that showed she was no longer running from them. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, the air around him steady now, no longer pulling in different directions, just holding. Evelyn looked down at the container again, then back up at him. "Will you still come?" she asked. The question was quiet, but it carried more weight than anything else she had said. Marcus did not hesitate. "Yes," he said. One word. No explanation. No condition. Evelyn nodded once, small but certain, like that answer was enough to anchor everything else. The colonel watched them both, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then something in it softened, just slightly, just enough to show that whatever he had expected this morning was no longer what mattered. He turned his head briefly toward the Marines, a silent signal passing through the line without a word. The formation shifted again, not dispersing, not stepping forward, just easing, like the reason for their presence had changed shape. Evelyn noticed. She looked back at the colonel, her voice quieter now. "They do not need to stay like that." It was not a request. It was an observation. The colonel nodded slowly. "They are not here to surround you," he said. "They are here because they care." Evelyn studied him for a moment, then gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, like she understood the intention, even if she was still adjusting to what it meant. Marcus glanced between them, feeling like the moment had reached a point where something else needed to happen, something smaller, something grounded. "You should eat," he said gently, nodding toward the container. Evelyn let out a soft breath that almost sounded like a quiet laugh, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little more. "You always bring me back to simple things," she said. Marcus shrugged again, a faint hint of a smile appearing for the first time that morning. "Simple works," he replied. The three of them stood there for a moment longer, the light brighter now, the reflections in the church doors clearer, showing not just where they were, but how they stood together. Not separated, not divided, just present. Evelyn adjusted her grip on the container, holding it steady, then took a small step toward the church, then paused, looking back at both of them. The moment stretched just enough to feel like a decision was about to be made. And then she said something that changed the direction of everything. "I am not going inside alone." The words were calm, but they carried a quiet finality that made both of them still for a second longer than expected. Marcus looked at her first, then followed her gaze toward the church doors, the reflection in the glass catching the three of them again. But now the image felt like it was waiting to be completed. Evelyn adjusted the container slightly in her hands, holding it closer to her chest, not out of protection, but out of something more intentional, like she was carrying more than just food into whatever came next. "If I walk through those doors," she continued, her voice steady, "it is not as someone who is being brought back. It is as someone who chooses to step forward." The colonel nodded slowly, understanding settling into his expression without resistance. "Then we walk with you," he said, his tone even, but different now, no longer leading, just present. Evelyn shook her head gently, not rejecting him, but refining the moment. "Not all of you," she said, glancing briefly toward the Marines behind them. "This is not a return. It is a beginning." The colonel turned his head slightly, looking back at the line of Marines, and for the first time, there was no tension in the gesture, no calculation. Just clarity. He gave a small, almost imperceptible signal, and the formation responded instantly, but quietly, stepping back, creating distance, not leaving, but no longer framing the moment. The street seemed to breathe again as the weight of their presence softened, the edges of the scene becoming human once more. Marcus watched it happen, feeling the shift not just around him, but inside him too. Evelyn turned back to him then, her expression soft but certain. "Will you walk with me?" she asked. The question was simple, but it carried something deeper than before, something that placed him not at the edge of the moment, but inside it. Marcus did not hesitate. "Yes," he said. He stepped forward, aligning himself beside her, not ahead, not behind, just next to her. The colonel watched them both, then moved as well, but slower, more measured, stopping just a step behind, allowing the space to belong to them first. Evelyn took a breath, deeper than any she had taken so far, and turned toward the church doors fully now. The light reflected across the glass shifted as she moved, the image of them stretching slightly, then settling again. She started walking, one step at a time, steady, not rushed, each movement deliberate, like she was reclaiming something with every inch forward. Marcus matched her pace without thinking, his presence quiet but firm, the same way it had always been. The container remained in her hands, no longer just something he brought, but something she carried forward herself. The colonel followed at a respectful distance, his posture no longer defined by command, but by something quieter, something earned. The church doors loomed closer, the wood worn smooth from years of use, the handle catching the light just enough to stand out. Evelyn reached them and paused, her hand hovering near the door, not touching it yet. For a moment, everything stilled again. The sounds of the street faded into the background, the air holding just enough tension to mark the significance of what stood in front of her. Marcus stood beside her, not speaking, not moving, just there. The colonel remained behind them, silent, watching, not interfering. Evelyn glanced sideways at Marcus, her eyes softening just slightly, then back at the door. "You kept showing up," she said quietly, almost to herself. Marcus nodded once. "So did you," he replied. The words settled between them, simple, but complete. Evelyn let out a slow breath, then finally reached for the handle, her fingers wrapping around it. Steady now, no tremor left. She pushed the door open gently, the hinges giving a soft, familiar sound as it moved inward, revealing the quiet interior beyond. Light filtered through stained glass, casting muted colors across the floor, calm, still, waiting. Evelyn stepped forward, crossing the threshold without hesitation this time, the container still in her hands, her posture upright, present. Marcus followed immediately, his steps just as steady, just as certain. The colonel remained at the entrance for a moment longer, watching them enter, the space beyond no longer something he controlled, but something he respected. He took a breath, then stepped inside as well, the door left slightly open behind him, the outside world still visible, but no longer the center of anything. Inside, the air felt different, quieter, heavier in a way that held meaning rather than pressure. Evelyn moved a few steps forward, then stopped, turning slightly as if to take in where she was, not lost, not uncertain, just present in a way she had not been before. Marcus stood beside her, his hands at his sides, his expression calm, grounded. The colonel stood a short distance behind, his gaze moving across the space, then back to her, not as someone reclaiming something, but as someone witnessing it being reclaimed. The light from the stained glass shifted. Again, falling across Evelyn's face, softening the lines of everything she had carried before this moment. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, something in her expression settling into place, quiet but certain. And then she turned to Marcus and said something he did not expect. "You are part of this now." The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they landed with a weight Marcus did not expect, settling somewhere deeper than anything else she had said before. He blinked once, his eyes shifting slightly as if trying to understand what she meant, but something in her expression told him she was not speaking lightly. Evelyn held his gaze, steady, certain, not asking, not offering, just stating something she had already decided. "Not because you have to be," she continued softly, "but because you chose to be, before any of this meant anything." Marcus felt his chest tighten, not from pressure, but from the way the moment unfolded around him, like he had stepped into something larger without realizing when it started. He glanced briefly toward the colonel, then back at her, unsure where he fit in something that clearly existed long before him. "I just brought food," he said, his voice quieter now, almost uncertain for the first time. Evelyn gave a small shake of her head, a faint smile touching her lips, not dismissing him, but correcting him gently. "You brought presents," she said. "That is different." The words lingered in the air, filling the space between them with something that did not need explanation. Behind them, the colonel stood still, his gaze resting on Marcus now, not measuring, not evaluating, but recognizing. The shift was complete. Whatever distance had existed between who Marcus was, and what stood around him had closed without force, without demand, simply through what he had done when no one was watching. The light from the stained glass shifted again, casting a soft band of color across the floor, brushing faintly against Marcus's shoes, then moving upward as the sun outside climbed higher. The church remained quiet, the stillness not empty, but full, like it was holding space for something to settle. Evelyn turned slightly, looking around the interior for a moment, her eyes tracing the rows of benches, the soft glow of the windows, the quiet presence of a place that had always been there, waiting without expectation. Then she looked back at Marcus again. "I cannot go back to who I was before," she said, her voice steady, not regretful, just clear. "But I do not have to stay who I became either." Marcus nodded slowly, the meaning not fully formed in his mind, but felt all the same. "You can choose something in between," he said, the words coming out simpler than the thought behind them. Evelyn's smile deepened slightly, a quiet acknowledgement. "Yes," she said. The colonel stepped forward then, just enough to stand within the same space again, his presence no longer distant, but not overwhelming either. "You do not have to figure it out alone," he said, his voice calm, carrying something that had shifted from authority into something more human, more grounded. Evelyn looked at him, holding his gaze without hesitation this time, the distance between them no longer defined by absence, but by choice. "I know," she replied. There was no resistance in it, no retreat, just acceptance, measured and real. Marcus stood between them, feeling the balance of the moment settle, like everything that had been uncertain before had found a place to rest, even if it was not fully resolved. Evelyn glanced down at the container still in her hands, then back up at Marcus, her expression softening again. "You kept something steady for me when I could not," she said. Marcus shifted slightly, his hands at his sides, unsure where to place them, what to do with the weight of what she was giving him. "You would have been okay," he said quietly. Evelyn shook her head, not in disagreement, but in understanding. "Maybe," she said, "but not the same." The words settled into the space gently, not heavy, not forced, just true. The colonel's gaze moved between them again, and for a moment, he said nothing, allowing the quiet to hold what words could not. The church doors behind them remained slightly open, the outside light filtering in, blending with the colors from the glass, creating a soft contrast between where they had been and where they stood now. Evelyn took a small step forward, deeper into the church, then paused, turning back just enough to look at both of them again. "I am staying," she said. It was not dramatic. It was not loud, but it carried everything. Marcus felt something in his chest, ease in a way he had not realized was tight until that moment. The colonel nodded once, not in command, not in approval, but in acknowledgement, like the decision belonged exactly where it had been made. Evelyn held the container a little closer, then looked at Marcus one more time, her eyes steady, warm. "Come back tomorrow," she said softly. Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I will." The simplicity of it felt right, like it had always been that way and always would be. The light shifted again, brighter now, filling more of the space, softening the edges of everything it touched. Evelyn turned forward again, her steps slow but certain, moving deeper into the church, not disappearing, not retreating, but continuing. Marcus watched her for a moment, then glanced at the colonel, who met his gaze with something that did not need to be spoken anymore. And in that quiet, something settled between them both. The quiet did not feel empty anymore. It felt complete. Marcus stood just inside the church doorway, the soft light stretching across the floor in front of him, watching as Evelyn moved a few steps farther in, her figure settling into the space like she had always belonged there, even after everything. The container remained in her hands, but now it looked different, not like something given, but something carried forward, something chosen. He exhaled slowly, not realizing he had been holding his breath, the tension that had followed him all morning finally loosening its grip. Behind him, the door shifted slightly as Colonel Whitaker stepped fully inside, the faint sound of it closing partway, marking a quiet separation from everything that had been outside. The street, the noise, the uniforms lined up in formation, all of it felt distant now, like it belonged to another version of the same day. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence held them gently, not pressing, not waiting for anything, just allowing the moment to exist as it was. Evelyn paused near the front row of benches, turning slightly as if to take in the space again, her eyes moving slowly, deliberately, like she was memorizing something she had once known and was now choosing to know again. Marcus took a small step forward, then stopped, unsure if he should follow her further or remain where he was. It did not feel like hesitation. It felt like respect. The colonel remained behind. His posture relaxed for the first time, his presence no longer defined by distance or command, but by something quieter, something earned through what had unfolded rather than what he had brought with him. Evelyn turned back then, her gaze finding Marcus first, then the colonel, and for a second, the three of them stood in a line that felt less like coincidence and more like something intentional. Not arranged, not planned, just right. She gave a small nod, not formal, not symbolic, just real. Marcus returned it instinctively, his expression calm, grounded in a way he had not expected when the day began. The colonel did not nod, but something in his face shifted, something subtle that carried more weight than any gesture could. He took a step closer, stopping at a respectful distance, his voice low when he finally spoke. "You changed something today," he said, looking at Marcus. There was no exaggeration in it, no performance, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had already happened. Marcus shook his head slightly, the motion automatic, almost reflexive. "I just showed up," he replied. The colonel's gaze held steady on him, not correcting him, but not fully agreeing either. "That is what most people do not do," he said. The words settled into the space without needing anything else around them. Evelyn watched the exchange, her expression softening, something like quiet pride flickering across her face. Not loud, not overwhelming, just present. She looked down at the container again, then back up at Marcus. "You did not see a situation," she said. "You saw a person." Marcus did not answer that. He did not need to. The truth of it had already shaped everything that followed. The light shifted again, brighter now, filling more of the room, softening the shadows along the walls and the edges of the benches, touching all three of them equally. The colonel let out a slow breath, something in his shoulders easing as if he had finally set something down that he had been carrying for longer than this morning. He glanced briefly toward the door, where the outside world still waited, then back at Marcus. "If you ever need anything," he said, his voice steady, not offering power, not offering influence, just offering presence. "You will not be standing alone." Marcus met his gaze, the weight of that statement settling in quietly, not overwhelming, not distant, just real. He nodded once. "I understand," he said. And he did, not in a way that changed who he was, but in a way that added something to it, something that did not need to be named. Evelyn turned then, taking a few more steps forward, deeper into the church, her pace unhurried, her posture steady, her presence fully her own now. She did not look back again. She did not need to. Marcus remained where he was for a moment longer, watching her go, not with concern, not with uncertainty, but with a quiet sense of completion, like something that had started without announcement had reached exactly where it was meant to. The colonel stepped back slightly, giving him space again, the balance between them no longer something that needed to be adjusted. Marcus turned toward the door then, the light from outside meeting him halfway, the sounds of the street slowly returning as he moved closer. He paused at the threshold, just for a second, glancing back once more, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was. Then he stepped outside, the air cooler, the world the same, but something inside him different, settled, steady. Behind him, the door remained slightly open, the light from inside spilling out just enough to blur the line between where he had been and where he was going. And as he walked down the steps, he realized something he had not understood before.